Hi everyone, welcome to Stack Mastery. So in last episode we created our first ASP.NET Web API project, and then we created all the endpoints that we need for crowd operations. So we done all the delete, update, and creating a response, or creating a resource, also reading the information through our API. So in this episode we're gonna talk more in detail about API and how we can improve our API. So initially, let's start from here. So in the last episode we create a create category endpoint for creating a category, but something that wasn't that much maybe proper in this endpoint is that here we are responding with no content helper method. So no content helper method, as you guys can see in the description, it's showing below, use 204 status code. So it sent a 204 status code to users, but 204 status code, when we want to create something through an endpoint, is not a proper response actually. So instead of 204, actually we can use a 201 created status code, which specifically can tell to users that your requested resource has created successfully. So what we can do here is that instead of this we can use created helper method. So let's try this to see now the user is getting the proper status code. Okay, our application now is run. So here I want to add pizza to categories. So now, as you guys can see, we are getting a 204 status code. But something else, we can tell to the client also where they can access the newly created request. So in ASP.NET Core we can do this using CreatedAtRoute through CreatedAtRoute and helper method. So this helper method creates a response with status code 201 and includes also a location header that points to a specific route for retrieving the resources. So how we can do this so easily, instead of this create, if we use CreatedAtRoute, not action, route. Okay, through this helper method we can do this. So when we use this CreatedAtRoute, we should specify the name of a route. So here we want to use this route because through these routes the user can access to each of those individual categories. So we need to use of these. But one point I want to mention here, when you guys want to use another endpoint in CreatedAtRoute, we should first set a name to this endpoint. So how we can do this? Through here. So I want to use the same name. So now when we set a name to this endpoint, then we can access to that one in another CreatedAtRoute helper method. So then we should pass the route's value. So here we should pass the ID to this because here it needs an ID to process the request. So let's first take this out. I want to take this out. So here where created category, not like this, category. Okay, I want to put this here, then use it here, and then use its ID here. Also we can send this as a response body, so we can simply have this here. So in this case also we can return this in a response body to users. So when we use this through this CreatedAtRoute, so we actually, instead of just returning okay or created, through this we are through this helper method we make our API even more RESTful API, because after this the users can also understand where it can go and look for the newly created resource too. So let's now create it and see what we can see in the response. Okay, I think it should be up now. Let's try it to test. Let's create again that pizza famous 2. Okay, so now here we can see that the 201 status code has received by client. Also in response body, we can see that the newly created resource also is visible, and also in response header section we can see a location has added, and through this location we pass the specific URI that through these users can request details of that individual category. So if it run it here, it can access to that endpoint. So now you can see that through this, now we are passing more and proper information, about our API. So something else I want to talk about. Let's fix this one too. So here we forget, I think, in the last episode to put and wrap our delete category endpoint through this try catch block. So let's do it. Okay, now I want to talk about passing data to an API. So data can be sent to an API in different ways, such as through the query string, the request body, route values, headers, or form data. So in ASP.NET Core, model binding is responsible for taking this incoming data and mapping it to the parameters of our controller's action. So if you want to be explicit about where a value, for instance, is coming from, we can use source attributes like FromBody, FromQuery, FromRoute, FromHeader, or from form, and these attributes can tell to ASP.NET Core exactly which part of the request should be used for each parameter. For instance, here we have a parameter with the name category, which is with the name category CreatedATRoute. So here, if we use, for instance, from body source attribute, we can tell to ASP.NET Core that it should look at the the body of the request to find this parameter. So and we can have we can use different source attributes. It depend on the place that we are working, but so far we didn't had this from body attribute here, and still it was working correctly and without issue. What is the reason and what's happening here? So when we use API controller attribute on top of our API, so when we decorate our controller with this attribute, ASP.NET Core applies some API specific rules and can automatically infer these sources for us. So we often don't need to write these source attributes manually, as ASP.NET do this for us. So these API controller attributes do this for us, and what it do for us is that always when we have some complex types like DTO classes, always they invert to come from the request body. So here, when we have a complex object like this DTO, these by default infer from body. So if we write the from body source attribute or no, it's not going to be any different in the both situation. It came from body, and this is by default. Also, if we have one parameter and the same name has mentioned also in route, as we can see. So in these cases, this value will came from route, and when we have some simple values like integer, like a string as a parameter in our action, and they don't mention in the route. So in this case, they will come from and they will infer from query a string. Another thing is that for file uploads, we didn't have any file uploads here, but for file uploads, parameters of type, for instance, form file or form file collection are inferred to come from form data. We will talk about this later, but now in this stage we don't have any file management yet. And because of this inferences rule, so in most cases ASP.NET Core can figure out the correct source for our parameters, so and which helps keep our controller actions clean and easy to read. So now let's go through the validating the inputs. So from a security perspective, validating input is very important. If you allow unvalidated data to go through our API, it can lead to unexpected error, bugs, and even serious security issues. For instance, here through this, users can request for creating a category, but consider if it sends some wrong information, wrong data for creating a category, and if we don't validate data and we process the request, some consequences it can have for our project. So now let's test this. So let's send the request without anybody to see what will happen. So if I refresh this one, and through this, let's send something without anybody to see what will happen. So in this case, obviously we are getting a non-empty request body error, and this is something normal because obviously there should be a body here in this endpoint for processing the request. So if we return this and here, but let's in this time we pass the body, what we sent a name as empty to see now what will happen. So as you guys can see, we got a 201. This is mean that the request was successfully and the resource has created correctly. So we create a category without name. I think it shouldn't be processed, and this is like a bug here because I think it's not possible to have a category without any name. So what is happening here as an unvalidated data is passing to our request, and our request, because it's not validating the coming information, only is processing it. But how we can validate the data? So in the first step, and in default actually in ASP.NET, so the default way to define validation in roles in ASP.NET Core is by using data annotation. So for example, we can use the required attribute to say that the name field must, for instance, always have a value, and these attributes come from a specific namespace that I will mention. Also, we can use we have many different attributes like max length, mean length, and so on. So here what we can do, only we need to have an attribute, for instance, with the name required. So it's coming from, as you guys can see, system.component model.data annotation. So through these, when we add these, the ASP.NET understand when these created category DTO has used in one of those endpoints, this field is required, and user should pass a value to this. And otherwise it's not going to process that request. So if we get back here and run this again, we should see now. So let's send another time this request. What will happen now? So okay, as you can see now here, we got a 400 status code, and the name field is required also as an error message. So why we got it 400 and why not 500? So we got a 400. In a 400 level status code mentioned that the problem is from client and not from our internal API, and API is working correctly, but the problem is from client because client didn't pass enough values and correct values. If the problem was from our API, we could pass 500 level status code. So also the level of the status code that we are sending to our users is really important, because through this status code user can understand what is the problem and where the problem exactly is coming from. So here through this 400 user can understand the problem is from his side, not the API. But only putting this data annotation here is not the whole things. There are other parts to here. For instance, here something that we call it model state. So through model state also we can see either all the roles has followed correctly or anything has violated or not. So if for instance we have a if condition here, and we write model state dot is valid. So through this is valid, we can see that either all the roles has followed correctly or not. So if this be false, mean that one of the those roles has violated. So in this case, we can understand that we shouldn't process the request, and we should throw an error for this. So here, if this be false, then we should return a bad request. Yeah, instead of processing the request. Okay. And something else that also we can have this possibility, as I said, so we have many different attributes. We have required, we have min length, we have max length. There are many different attributes that you guys easily can go and study, but using them is the same, so it's not different for each of them that you're gonna use here. And something else that you can customize also here, for instance, when a user violates one of these, also you can customize the error message that you're gonna send for users. Here, for instance, we can have error message, then something customized for yourself. For instance, the category, I don't know, name of the category, for instance, can not be null, like this, for instance, or anything else. It's depend on the place that you are using this and the project that you are doing. So, but you can customize anything. Now let's repeat the request to see what will happen in this time. So okay, as you guys can see, name of the category cannot be null. We got the exact message error that we wrote and used with the attribute. So now let's pass something. Let's go through our famous Visual to sample to see. Okay, now we can see that we got the 201 with the response body, and everything is working correctly and without the issues. So validating the input is necessary, and always we should use them. Thank you guys for watching this episode. So in the next episode, we're going to talk about dependency injection, which is a really big topic, and we're going to talk more in detail about dependency injection in the ASP.NET Web API. Thank you for watching this episode, and if you was happy, and if you guys was happy with watching this course, please subscribe the channel and follow us. I will get back with more information in the next episode. Thank you. Bye.